The evening started like so many others in my small dining room, with the familiar sound of my son Robert's key turning in the front door. But this time, something was different. His footsteps were heavier, more deliberate. And when I heard Valerie's sharp voice cutting through the quiet of my home, I knew this wasn't going to be one of their usual casual visits. I had been preparing dinner for 3 hours, as I always did when they announced they were coming. My arthritic hands had carefully kneaded the dough for homemade bread, seasoned the roast with herbs from my small garden, and set the table with the china that had been my mother's. The same china I only used for special occasions, though lately any visit from my son felt like a special occasion, given how rare they had become. At 70 years old, I had learned to find joy in these small preparations. Each perfectly folded napkin, each polished glass, each carefully arranged flower from my garden was my way of showing love. It was the same way I had shown love for 35 years of motherhood, through countless meals, countless sacrifices, countless moments of putting everyone else's needs before my own. When they finally entered the dining room, I could immediately sense the tension. Robert avoided my eyes, fidgeting with his phone like a teenager caught doing something wrong. Valerie, on the other hand, surveyed my carefully prepared table with that expression I had come to know so well over the years. The look of someone who is perpetually disappointed by everything around her. "Hello, Mom," Robert said, finally looking up from his phone. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, a nervousness that made my maternal instincts immediately alert. "Thanks for making dinner. Everything looks great." Valerie settled into her chair with the theatrical sigh she always used when she wanted everyone to know she was making a sacrifice just by being present. She was wearing one of her expensive dresses, the kind that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her perfectly manicured nails drummed impatiently against the table. "Shirley," she said, and I noticed she never called me Mom like other daughters-in-law might. "We need to discuss something important tonight with you." The way she said it with that tone that suggested I was a child who needed to be managed rather than an adult who deserved respect should have been my first warning. But I had become so accustomed to swallowing my pride when it came to Valerie that I simply smiled and began serving the food I had spent hours preparing. "Of course, dear, but let's eat first. I made Robert's favorite roast, the one with rosemary and garlic, and I baked fresh bread this afternoon." As I served them, I couldn't help but notice how they exchanged glances across the table. There was something rehearsed about their behavior, as if they had practiced this conversation before arriving. Robert kept clearing his throat nervously, while Valerie maintained that artificially bright smile she used when she was about to ask for something. "The food is delicious, as always," Robert said, though he was barely touching his plate. "You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's never trouble when it's for you," I replied automatically, the words I had said thousands of times over the years. A mother's joy is in taking care of her family. Valerie's smile flickered for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like irritation. She set down her fork and leaned forward, her elbows on the table in a way that would have horrified my own mother. "Actually, Shirley, that's exactly what we wanted to talk to you about, taking care of family." The way she emphasized those last 2 words sent a chill down my spine. I had learned, over the 8 years since Robert had married her, to read the subtle signs that preceded Valerie's more difficult conversations. The slight tilt of her head, the way she clasped her hands together, the false sweetness in her voice that barely concealed something much sharper underneath. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Robert finally looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my heart sink. It was a look I recognized from his childhood, the expression he wore when he had broken something valuable and was trying to figure out how to tell me about it. But this time, the stakes felt much higher than a broken vase or a poor report card. "Mom, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're in a really difficult financial situation." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I set down my own fork, my appetite suddenly gone, and waited for him to continue. In the silence that followed, I could hear the old clock in the hallway ticking, marking the seconds of what I somehow knew would be a life-changing conversation. "How difficult?" I asked, though I was already mentally calculating the balance in my savings account, already planning how I could help, already falling into the pattern that had defined our relationship for so many years. Valerie took over the conversation with the efficiency of someone who had clearly prepared for this moment. "Robert lost his job 3 months ago. We've been living off credit cards, but we've maxed them all out. We're facing foreclosure on the house, repossession of both cars, and we have debts that—" She paused dramatically, as if the numbers were too overwhelming to speak aloud. "Let's just say they're substantial." 3 months. My son had been unemployed for 3 months, and this was the first I was hearing about it. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same pain I had experienced countless times over the years when I realized that my son came to me not to share his life, but only when he needed something from me.
"Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, looking directly at Robert. "Maybe we could have figured something out before things got this bad." Robert's face reddened, and he looked down at his barely touched plate. "I kept thinking I'd find another job quickly. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." But it was Valerie who answered, her voice carrying that edge of impatience she never bothered to hide anymore. "The truth is, Shirley, we didn't want to come to you at all. We're both adults, and we should be able to handle our own problems. But we've exhausted every other option." Every other option. The phrase stung more than I cared to admit. I was their last resort, the option they turned to only when everything else had failed. Not their first call when trouble started, not their partner in problem solving, but their final, desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of their choices. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said, though I already knew the answer. Valerie's artificial smile became even brighter, if that were possible. "Well, we know you've been saving money for years. You live so simply, so modestly. You don't spend money on expensive clothes or vacations or entertainment. We thought perhaps you could help us get back on our feet." The way she said simply and modestly made it sound like character flaws rather than choices I had made in order to be financially responsible. The implication was clear. Because I didn't spend money on myself, I should spend it on them instead. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, though I was beginning to feel sick to my stomach. Robert finally found his voice again. $50,000 would cover the immediate debts and give us a few months to get back on track. $50,000. It was almost exactly the amount I had saved over the past 15 years by denying myself countless small pleasures, by repairing clothes instead of buying new ones, by eating simple meals and avoiding any expense that wasn't absolutely necessary. It was money I had saved by working extra hours at the sewing shop, even after I should have retired, by taking on alterations and repairs at home, by saying no to myself every single day so that I would have something set aside for emergencies. "That's a lot of money," I said quietly. "We know it is," Valerie replied quickly, "but think of it as an investment in our future, in Robert's future. Once he finds a new job, we'll pay you back, of course, with interest." The promises came so easily, so smoothly, that I wondered how many times they had rehearsed this conversation. But what struck me most was what they weren't saying. There was no acknowledgement of the sacrifice this would represent for me, no recognition that this money represented years of self-denial, no understanding that at 70 years old, I didn't have the luxury of time to save such an amount again. What if Robert doesn't find a job right away? What if it takes longer than expected to get back on your feet? The question seemed to catch them off guard. They exchanged another glance, and I realized they hadn't actually planned for that possibility. They had assumed that my money would solve their problems, and they hadn't really thought much beyond that assumption. "He'll find something," Valerie said, with a confidence that seemed forced. "Robert is talented and experienced. It's just a matter of time." But Robert's track record didn't inspire that kind of confidence.
This wasn't his first job loss, and it wouldn't be his first time coming to me for financial help. Over the years, there had been the loan for the down payment on their house, which had never been repaid, the money for Valerie's car when theirs broke down, the funds for various emergencies that always seemed to arise just when their own resources were depleted. "I need to think about this," I said finally. Valerie's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of anger that she quickly tried to cover. "What's to think about? Robert is your son, your only child. Family helps family." There it was again, that weaponization of family loyalty that I had heard so many times over the years. The implication that any hesitation on my part was a betrayal of motherly love, that putting my own financial security ahead of their wants was somehow selfish. "Of course family helps family," I replied, feeling my own temperature rising slightly. "But $50,000 is my entire life savings. It's the money I've set aside for my own emergencies, my own future security." "What emergencies could you possibly have?" Valerie asked, with a laugh that sounded genuinely puzzled. "You live in a paid-off house. You don't have expensive tastes. You don't travel or buy luxury items. What could you possibly need that much money for?" The question revealed so much about how she saw me, how she had always seen me. In her mind, I wasn't a complete person with my own dreams, fears, and needs. I was simply Robert's mother, a supporting character in their story whose only purpose was to provide whatever they required. "Of course family helps family," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I could need medical care. I could have home repairs that are beyond my budget. I could want to travel, to see places I've never seen. I could want to help other family members or donate to causes I care about. I could simply want the security of knowing I have something set aside for my old age." But even as I said these things, I could see in their faces that they didn't really understand. To them, my life was already over in any meaningful sense. I was already old, already settled, already past the point where I might want or need anything significant for myself. "Come on, Mom," Robert said, and there was a wheedling quality in his voice that reminded me painfully of how he had sounded as a child when he wanted a toy or a treat. "You know you'd be happy to help us. You've always put family first." That phrase, "you've always put family first," hit me like a physical blow. Because it was true, and because I was suddenly seeing it in a new light. For 35 years, I had put family first. I had put Robert first through his childhood, his adolescence, his early adulthood. I had put his father first through 20 years of marriage, caring for him through his final illness until it drained me emotionally and financially. And then I had continued putting Robert first through his marriage, his career changes, his various crises and emergencies. When had I ever put myself first? When had anyone in my family ever encouraged me to put myself first? "I've always put family first," I repeated slowly. "But I'm starting to wonder if that's been the right thing to do." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked genuinely shocked, as if the idea that I might question this fundamental arrangement had never occurred to him. Valerie's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like contempt. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. I took a deep breath, feeling something stirring inside me that I hadn't felt in years. It was anger, yes, but it was also something more complex. It was the beginning of a realization that had been building for months, maybe years, without my fully acknowledging it. "It means," I said carefully, "that maybe constantly rescuing people from the consequences of their choices isn't actually helping them. Maybe it's enabling them to continue making poor decisions because they know someone else will always clean up the mess." Robert's face went pale. "Are you saying I make poor decisions?" "I'm saying that losing a job and not telling your mother for 3 months suggests that you haven't learned to handle adult responsibilities the way you should at 35 years old." The words came out more harshly than I had intended, but once they were spoken, I realized they were true. More than true. They were overdue. Valerie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the small dining room. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Robert, your mother is basically calling you irresponsible. I'm not calling him irresponsible, though part of me wondered if that would actually be accurate. I'm saying that maybe the way I've handled things over the years hasn't helped him develop the independence he needs. So this is somehow your fault now? Valerie's voice was rising, taking on that shrill quality that had made me uncomfortable from the first time I met her. You're the one who spoiled him, so now you're going to punish him by refusing to help when he really needs it? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had spoiled Robert, in many ways. I had made his life too easy, solved too many of his problems, cushioned too many of his falls. But I had done it out of love, out of a desire to spare him the hardships I had faced in my own life. I had thought I was being a good mother. I'm not punishing anyone, I said quietly. I'm trying to understand how we got to this point. The point where your son needs help and you're too selfish to provide it? Valerie shot back. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I had been called many things in my life, but selfish had never been one of them. I had spent decades being the opposite of selfish, putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own so consistently that I had almost forgotten I had needs at all. Valerie, Robert said, his voice carrying a warning tone, that's enough. But Valerie was just getting started. Years of resentment seemed to be pouring out of her all at once, and I realized this conversation had been building for much longer than just the 3 months since Robert lost his job. No, Robert, it's not enough. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of watching you bend over backward to please a woman who gives you just enough support to keep you dependent, but never enough to actually help you succeed. I stared at her, genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've kept Robert emotionally tied to you his entire adult life. You've made him feel guilty for every independent choice he's made, for every step he's taken away from this house and your control. The accusation was so far from my perception of our relationship that I didn't know how to respond. I had always thought I was being supportive, encouraging. I had celebrated Robert's achievements, helped him through his struggles, been available whenever he needed me. That's not true, I said, but even as I said it, I wondered if there might be some truth I had been blind to. Isn't it? Valerie continued, her voice gaining momentum. Every time Robert has tried to make a major decision without consulting you first, you've made him feel like he was abandoning you. When we bought our house, when we planned our wedding, when he took his last job, every time you found ways to make it about you, about how left out you felt, about how ungrateful he was being. I tried to remember those occasions, tried to see them from her perspective. Had I really done that? Had my attempts to stay involved in my son's life actually been attempts to control him? I was just trying to be a good mother, I said weakly. A good mother would want her son to be independent. A good mother would encourage her adult child to build his own life instead of always running back to mommy when things get difficult. The words were cruel, but they were also forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths about the dynamic I had created with Robert. Had I been an enabler rather than a supporter? Had my willingness to always be there, always help, always provide what was needed, actually prevented him from developing his own strength? Robert was looking back and forth between us, his face a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. This isn't what I wanted, he said quietly. I just needed help. I didn't want this to turn into an attack on Mom. It's not an attack, Valerie said, though her tone suggested otherwise. It's honesty, something this family could use more of. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but I was determined not to let them fall. Not in front of her. Not when she was looking at me with such obvious disdain. You know what, Valerie? I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You're absolutely right about one thing. This family could use more honesty. She looked surprised, as if she had expected me to continue defending myself. So let me be honest, I continued. You're right that I may have made mistakes in how I raised Robert. You're right that I may have been too willing to solve his problems instead of letting him solve them himself. But you know what else is true? I stood up, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in years coursing through me. The truth is that you've never respected me, not from the day Robert brought you home to meet me. The truth is that you've spent 8 years treating me like an embarrassment, like something you have to tolerate in order to keep your husband happy. The truth is that you've made it clear in 1,000 small ways that you think I'm beneath you, that my life has been small and meaningless compared to yours. Valerie's face was flushing red, but I wasn't finished. And the truth is that despite all of that, despite the way you've treated me, I've continued to welcome you into my home, to cook for you, to include you in family celebrations, to bite my tongue when you make your little comments about my clothes, my house, my life choices. I could see Robert shifting uncomfortably in his chair, but I felt like I was finally saying things that had needed to be said for years. So yes, maybe I've made mistakes as a mother, but what mistakes have you made as a daughter-in-law? When have you ever shown me kindness or respect? When have you ever treated me like family instead of like an obstacle? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Valerie was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. It might have been surprise, or it might have been respect. Robert was looking down at his hands as if he couldn't bear to watch this confrontation. Finally, Valerie spoke, and her voice was quieter than before. I never said your life was meaningless. You didn't have to say it. You showed it in every interaction we've had. The way you roll your eyes when I tell stories about the old days. The way you change the subject when I mention my work at the sewing shop. The way you've made it clear that my opinions don't matter. My experiences don't count. My feelings don't deserve consideration. I sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted.
So forgive me if I'm not immediately eager to hand over my life savings to solve your problems. Maybe I'm finally learning that it's okay to consider my own needs once in a while. Robert looked up at me with an expression that was hard to read. Mom, I had no idea you felt this way. Of course you didn't, I said, and I tried to keep any bitterness out of my voice. Because I never said anything, because I was so focused on being the good mother who never complained, never demanded anything, never made waves. But now you are? Valerie asked, and there was still an edge to her voice. Now I'm trying to figure out who I am, beyond being Robert's mother and Charles's widow. I'm trying to remember what I wanted out of life before I decided that everyone else's dreams were more important than mine. The conversation might have continued, might have gone deeper, but at that moment, my phone rang. The ringtone was cheerful and incongruous given the tension in the room, and for a moment, we all just stared at each other. Answer it, Robert said, quietly. I looked at the caller ID and felt my heart skip a beat. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made me pause. Hello, I answered, still looking at Robert and Valerie across the table. Is this Shirley Matthews? The voice was male, mature, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Yes, this is Shirley. Shirley, this is Michael Jenkins. I don't know if you remember me, but we knew each other in college. We dated for about 2 years before I moved to Seattle. Michael Jenkins. The name hit me like lightning, bringing with it a flood of memories I had carefully tucked away decades ago. Michael with his bright smile and ambitious dreams. Michael who had asked me to come to America with him when we were both 22. Michael who had written me letters for months after he left until I stopped answering them because I had met Charles and thought I was choosing stability over uncertainty. Michael, I said, and I could hear the wonder in my own voice. Of course I remember you. Robert and Valerie were staring at me with obvious curiosity, but I found myself turning away from them, focusing entirely on the voice on the phone. I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue like this, Michael continued. I found you through social media, and I've been working up the courage to reach out for weeks. I don't mind at all, I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. This is such a surprise. How are you? Where are you calling from? I'm still in Seattle. I built an engineering company here, raised 3 kids, lost my wife about 2 years ago. His voice softened on that last part. I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately, thinking about old friends, old times. Your name kept coming up in my thoughts. I could feel tears forming in my eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of frustration or anger.
They were tears of something I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe, or nostalgia, or something deeper. "I'm so sorry about your wife," I said. "Thank you. She was a good woman, and we had a good life together. But surely I have to ask, are you happy? Did you get the life you wanted?" The question was so direct, so unexpected that I didn't know how to answer. Behind me, I could hear Robert and Valerie whispering, but their voices seemed to be coming from very far away. "That's a complicated question," I said finally. Michael laughed, and the sound brought back memories of late nights in the college library, of walks across campus, of dreams shared over coffee in the student union. "Most important questions are complicated," he said. "But I'd like to hear your answer anyway. I'd like to hear about your life, about what you've been doing for the past 40 years. I turned back to look at Robert and Valerie, who were still sitting at my carefully prepared dining table, waiting for me to solve their problems with my money, waiting for me to once again put their needs ahead of my own. "Michael," I said, making a decision that surprised even me, "I'd like that too. But I can't talk right now. Can I call you back tomorrow?" "Of course. I'll give you my number." As I wrote down his information, I felt something shifting inside me. It was as if a door I had closed decades ago was suddenly opening, letting in light I had forgotten existed. After I hung up, Robert and Valerie stared at me expectantly. "Who was that?" Robert asked. "An old friend," I said simply. "Someone I knew before I met your father." "A boyfriend?" Valerie asked, and there was something in her tone that might have been amusement. "Yes," I said, and I found myself smiling. "A boyfriend." The smile seemed to unnerve them both. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, can we get back to what we were discussing? The money situation is really urgent." And just like that, the spell was broken. We were back to their crisis, their needs, their assumption that my life existed primarily to serve theirs. But something had changed in me during that brief phone conversation. Michael's question, "Are you happy?" was echoing in my mind. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When was the last time I had even asked myself that? "Robert," I said quietly, "I need you both to leave now." They looked stunned. "What do you mean?" Valerie asked. "I mean, I need time to think about everything, about the money you're asking for, about our relationship, about what I want for the rest of my life." "But Mom," Robert protested, "the foreclosure notice is final. We don't have time for you to think." "Then maybe you should have thought of that 3 months ago when you first lost your job," I replied, and the sharpness in my voice surprised all of us. Valerie stood up again, and this time her movement was filled with anger rather than theatrical exasperation. "Fine," she said. "Take your time to think, but don't expect us to come begging when you finally come to your senses." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied. As they gathered their things to leave, Robert tried one more time. "Mom, I know tonight didn't go the way any of us hoped, but please don't let one difficult conversation destroy our relationship. I love you, and I need you in my life." I looked at my son, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, I saw him clearly. I saw the ways in which I had failed him by making life too easy. I saw the ways in which he had failed me by taking my sacrifices for granted. I saw the ways in which we had both become trapped in patterns that served neither of us well. "Robert," I said gently, "I love you too. But love isn't the same thing as enabling, and need isn't the same thing as respect." After they left, I sat in my dining room for a long time, staring at the barely touched food, the carefully set table, the flowers I had arranged with such hope for a pleasant evening. The house felt different somehow. Emptier, but also more peaceful. I thought about Michael's voice, about the warmth in it, about the way he had asked if I was happy, as if my happiness actually mattered to someone. When was the last time Robert had asked if I was happy? When was the last time anyone had asked? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the conversation with Robert and Valerie, about the things that had been said and the things that hadn't been said. I thought about the pattern of our relationship, about how I had trained him to see me as an endless source of support without ever teaching him that sources can be depleted. But mostly, I thought about Michael. I thought about the girl I had been at 22, full of dreams and possibilities. I thought about the choice I had made to stay, to choose security over adventure, stability over uncertainty. I had never regretted that choice. It had given me Robert and many years of contentment with his father. But now, for the first time in my life, I found myself wondering about the path not taken. The next morning, I called Michael back. "I was hoping you would," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You asked me yesterday if I was happy," I said without preamble. "I've been thinking about that question all night." And I realized that I don't remember the last time anyone asked me that. I don't remember the last time I asked myself that. "That's not really an answer," Michael said gently. I took a deep breath. "No, Michael, I'm not happy. I'm not unhappy exactly, but I'm not happy either. I think I've been existing, going through the motions of a life without really living it." There was silence on the other end of the line, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that invites honesty rather than demanding it. "Tell me about your life," he said finally. "Tell me about the past 40 years. So I did. I told him about marrying Charles, about raising Robert, about working at the sewing shop for 25 years. I told him about Charles's illness and death, about the loneliness that had followed, about the way my world had gradually shrunk until it consisted mainly of my house, my son's occasional visits, and my small daily routines. But as I talked, I found myself also remembering other things. The satisfaction I had felt in creating beautiful clothes for special occasions, the friendships I had formed with customers who trusted me with their most important garments, the small garden I had nurtured, the books I had read, the quiet contentments that had punctuated the years. "It sounds like you've had a meaningful life," Michael said when I finished. "In some ways," I agreed. "But I think I lost myself somewhere along the way. I became so focused on being what everyone else needed that I forgot to think about what I needed." "What do you need?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked me what I needed, so long since I had allowed myself to think in those terms. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think that's part of the problem." "Well," Michael said, and I could hear that familiar hint of mischief in his voice that I remembered from our college days, "maybe it's time to find out." Over the next 2 weeks, Michael and I talked every day. Long conversations that stretched late into the evening, covering everything from our memories of college to our thoughts about aging, from the books we had read to the dreams we had abandoned and the ones we still harbored. He told me about his life in Seattle, about building his engineering firm from nothing, about raising 3 children largely on his own after his wife developed early onset dementia. He told me about the challenges and rewards of caring for someone with that disease, about the grief that had come not just with her death, but with watching her disappear gradually over the course of several years. "I learned something during those difficult years," he said during one of our late-night conversations. "I learned that time is the most precious thing we have, and that it's criminal to waste it on relationships or situations that don't bring joy." His words resonated with something deep inside me. How much of my time had I wasted on situations that didn't bring joy? How many years had I spent accepting disrespect from Valerie because I thought that was what good mother-in-laws were supposed to do? How many opportunities for happiness had I let slip by because I thought my role was to sacrifice rather than to live? "Surely," Michael said during our 10th conversation, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer." "What is it?" "Would you consider coming to visit me? Not permanently, not with any expectations or obligations, just a visit. I'd like to show you Seattle, introduce you to my children, cook dinner for you on my deck overlooking Puget Sound? My first instinct was to say no. The idea of traveling across the country to visit a man I hadn't seen in 40 years seemed impractical at best, foolish at worst. What would people think? What would Robert say? What if it was a mistake? But then I remembered his question from that first phone call. Are you happy? I'd like that, I heard myself saying. I'd like that very much. The excitement in Michael's voice was infectious. Really? You'd really come? Yes, I said, and as I said it, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Anticipation. Not anxiety about someone else's needs or problems, but genuine excitement about something good that was going to happen to me. When? He asked. I thought about my calendar, about my routines, about all the small obligations that filled my days. And then I realized that most of those obligations were self-imposed, habits I had created to fill time rather than genuine commitments. What about next month? I said. Perfect. I'll start planning your visit right now. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to remember the last time I had felt this way. Giddy, almost, like a schoolgirl with a crush. It was ridiculous at my age, I told myself, but it was also wonderful. That afternoon, Robert called. Hi, Mom, he said, and his voice was subdued. How are you doing? I'm well, Robert. How are you? Not great, to be honest. We got the final foreclosure notice yesterday. Valerie's been, well, she's been difficult to live with. I waited for him to continue, resisting the urge to immediately offer comfort or solutions. Mom, I need to apologize for the other night. The way Valerie spoke to you was completely inappropriate, and I should have stopped her. Yes, I said simply. You should have. He seemed taken aback by my directness. I guess I was so focused on our financial problems that I didn't think about how we were making you feel. And how do you think you were making me feel? There was a long pause. Like you only mattered for what you could give us. Like your feelings and needs didn't count. That's exactly right, I said quietly. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I don't know how things got so messed up between us. I felt a softening in my heart toward my son, but I also felt a new kind of strength that I wasn't willing to give up. Robert, I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand that apologizing isn't enough anymore. I need to see real changes. What kind of changes? I need you to start treating me like a person who has her own needs, her own dreams, not just as your mother who exists to solve your problems. Of course, Mom, I can do that. Can you? Because you're doing it right now, Robert. You called to apologize, which is good, but then immediately you told me about your foreclosure problems. You're still seeing me primarily as someone who can help you, not as someone who might have her own news to share. Another long pause. You're right. I'm sorry. How are you doing, Mom? What's new in your life? The question was clearly forced, but it was a start. Actually, I do have news, I said. I'm going to Seattle next month to visit an old friend. Seattle? What old friend? Someone I knew in college, before I met your father. A man? Robert's voice carried a note of surprise that might have been amusing under different circumstances. Yes, a man. His name is Michael Jenkins. We've been talking on the phone, and he's invited me to visit. The silence that followed was so long, I wondered if we had been disconnected. Mom, Robert said finally, are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, you don't really know this person anymore. It's been, 40 years? There it was again. The assumption that I couldn't make good decisions for myself, that I needed protection from my own choices. Robert, I'm 70 years old. I think I'm capable of deciding whether or not to visit an old friend. But what if he has ulterior motives? What if he's trying to scam you or take advantage of you? What if he is? I replied. What if I make a mistake? What if this turns out badly? Will that be worse than spending the rest of my life wondering what if and never taking any chances? But Mom... Robert, I interrupted. I need you to listen to me very carefully. For 35 years, I have lived my life in service to other people. I have made every major decision based on what was best for you, or what was best for your father, or what was expected of a good wife and mother, and you know what I have to show for it? I paused, waiting for him to answer, but he remained silent. I have a son who only calls when he needs money. I have a daughter-in-law who has never shown me an ounce of respect. I have a house full of memories and a life that has become so small, I can barely remember who I used to be. That's not fair, Mom. I don't only call when I need money. When did you last call just to see how I was doing? When did you last visit without wanting something? When did you last ask about my dreams, my interests, my feelings? The silence stretched on, and I realized he couldn't answer because the answer was never, or so long ago that neither of us could remember. I'm going to Seattle, Robert. I'm going to see Michael, and I'm going to remember what it feels like to be valued for who I am rather than what I can provide. And what about us? What about our problems? The question revealed so much about how he saw the world, how he had always seen our relationship. Even now, even after everything that had been said, his primary concern was still how my choices would affect him. Your problems are exactly that, Robert. Your problems. You're a 35-year-old man.
It's time you learn to solve them yourself. But the house, the foreclosure. The house you bought without consulting me. The mortgage you signed without considering whether you could really afford it. The lifestyle you and Valerie chose without thinking about the long-term consequences. Each statement was like a small revelation, not just to him, but to me. For the first time, I was seeing clearly how many of his emergencies were actually the predictable results of poor planning and unrealistic expectations. So you're just going to let us lose everything? I'm going to let you face the consequences of your choices, just like any other adult has to do. This isn't like you, Mom. This isn't the woman who raised me. You're right, I said. The woman who raised you would have already written you a check and apologized for making you ask. But that woman enabled you to become a man who thinks his mother's job is to rescue him from every difficult situation. Maybe it's time for both of us to change. After I hung up, I felt drained, but also oddly exhilarated. It was the first time in my adult life that I had put my needs ahead of Robert's, and the sky hadn't fallen. The world hadn't ended. I was still his mother, and I still loved him. But I was also a person in my own right. Over the next few weeks, as my trip to Seattle approached, I threw myself into preparations with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I bought new clothes. Not practical, sensible clothes, but clothes that made me feel attractive and confident. I got my hair styled at a real salon instead of cutting it myself. I even bought makeup, something I hadn't worn in years. Each purchase felt like a small act of rebellion against the woman I had become, the woman who denied herself everything so she could give more to others. This new woman, the one who was emerging as my trip approached, felt both familiar and foreign. Familiar because she reminded me of who I had been at 22, full of dreams and possibilities. Foreign because I had buried her so deeply for so long that I almost forgot she existed. 3 days before my departure, Valerie showed up at my door. I almost didn't answer the bell. Through the window, I could see her pacing on my front porch, and everything about her body language suggested confrontation. But curiosity won out over caution, and I opened the door. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was limp and unwashed. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Hello, Valerie. Please, come in." She swept past me into the living room, her movements sharp and agitated. "I can't believe you're really going through with this insane trip." "It's nice to see you too," I replied dryly. "Don't choke, Shirley. This isn't funny."
Do you have any idea what you're doing to your son? I'm going to visit a friend. I fail to see how that affects Robert. You fail to see how abandoning your family in their time of greatest need affects your son? The word abandoning hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I felt the old guilt rising up. But then I remembered Michael's voice on the phone, the excitement in it when he talked about showing me his city, his life. I remembered the way he had said my name, as if it were something precious. I remembered the feeling of being valued, being wanted for myself rather than for what I could provide. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said firmly. I'm taking a vacation. A vacation? Valerie's voice rose to a near shriek. We're losing our house and you're taking a vacation with some man you haven't seen in 40 years? Valerie, sit down, please. She looked like she wanted to refuse, but something in my tone made her comply. She perched on the edge of my sofa like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. I want to ask you something, I said, settling into my favorite chair across from her. And I want you to answer honestly. She glared at me, but said nothing. In the 8 years since you married Robert, have you ever, even once, treated me with genuine respect and affection? Of course I have. I've always been polite. Polite, yes, but respectful? Affectionate? Have you ever made me feel welcome in your life, or have you always made it clear that I was an inconvenience you had to tolerate? Valerie's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Have you ever asked about my interests, my opinions, my feelings? Have you ever invited me to spend time with you that didn't involve me providing something? My cooking, my babysitting, my money? That's not... we've what, Valerie? When have we ever just spent time together because you enjoyed my company? She was staring at her hands now, and I could see that my questions were hitting their mark. You want to know what I think? I continued. I think you've spent 8 years trying to minimize my role in Robert's life because you saw me as competition. You wanted him to need only you, to turn only to you for support and comfort and guidance. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then why have you always made it clear that my advice wasn't welcome? Why have you rolled your eyes every time Robert mentioned visiting me or calling me? Why have you consistently made me feel like a third wheel in my own son's life? I didn't mean... And now, when you need money, suddenly I'm important again. Suddenly I'm family. Suddenly my role as Robert's mother matters. Valerie was crying now, and for the first time since I had known her, the tears seemed genuine rather than manipulative. I didn't think about how you felt. No, you didn't, because you never saw me as a complete person. You saw me as Robert's mother, as an extension of him rather than as an individual with my own thoughts and feelings and needs. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice was so small, I had to strain to hear it. I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. She looked so young suddenly, so lost and frightened. But I also felt a strength I had never felt before, a clarity that I wasn't willing to give up. Valerie, I appreciate your apology, but here's what I need you to understand. I'm going to Seattle not to punish you or Robert, but to remember who I am beyond being someone's mother or someone's source of emergency funds. But what if we don't come back? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized it was a possibility I hadn't fully considered. What if I didn't come back? What if I found in Seattle something I had been missing here? Then you and Robert will have to figure out your lives without me, I said, finally, just like millions of other adult couples do every day. But we're family. Family is supposed to be based on love and respect and mutual support, I interrupted. When did you last show me love, Valerie? When did you last respect my opinions or my choices? When have you ever supported me through anything? She had no answer, and we sat in silence for several minutes. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Nothing, I replied, and I meant it. I don't want anything from you, Valerie. I just want you to understand that I'm a person, not just a resource for you to use when you need something. And if we lose the house, if Robert can't find work, if we end up homeless, then you'll figure it out. You'll downsize, you'll move to a less expensive area, you'll both get whatever jobs you can find, and you'll rebuild from there, like adults do. You make it sound so easy. I don't think it's easy at all. I think it's terrifying and difficult and heartbreaking, but I also think it's necessary. You and Robert have been living beyond your means for years, making choices based on what you wanted rather than what you could afford. The consequences of those choices were always going to come due eventually. Valerie stood up abruptly. I can see there's no point in continuing this conversation. You've made up your mind. Yes, I have. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to me. You know, Shirley, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in Seattle. I really do. But I also hope you don't end up regretting leaving your family when they needed you most. Valerie, I said quietly, my family has needed me for 35 years. When do I get to need something for myself? After she left, I called Michael. How's the packing going? He asked, and the warmth in his voice was like a balm to my soul. Slowly, I admitted. I keep second-guessing myself about what to bring. Bring whatever makes you happy, and don't worry about the rest. We can buy anything you need when you get here. Michael, can I ask you something? Of course. What if this doesn't work out the way we hope? What if we discover that we've both idealized the past, that we don't really know each other anymore? Michael was quiet for a moment. Then we'll have spent a month getting to know each other as we are now. We'll have had some good conversations, seen some beautiful places, and created some new memories. That doesn't sound like failure to me. But what if... Shirley, he interrupted gently, what if it does work out? What if we discover that we still connect, that we still care about each other, that we could build something beautiful together at this stage of our lives? Aren't you curious about that possibility? I was. More than curious. I was excited in a way I hadn't been in decades. Yes, I admitted. I am. Then stop worrying about what might go wrong and start thinking about what might go right. The morning of my departure, Robert came to drive me to the airport. He looked better than he had the last time I saw him. Cleaner, more rested, more focused. You look good, I told him as we loaded my suitcase into his car. I got a job, he said, and there was a pride in his voice that I hadn't heard in years. It's not much, night shift at a cleaning company, but it's honest work and it pays enough to rent a small room downtown. A room? What about the house? We lost it yesterday. The bank took possession. He said it matter-of-factly, without the panic or desperation I would have expected. It turns out we couldn't really afford it anyway. And Valerie? She moved back in with her parents. She told me she can't be with someone who can't maintain the lifestyle she deserves. I waited for him to ask for comfort, for reassurance, for financial help with his new situation. But he just started the car and began driving toward the airport. How do you feel about that? I asked finally. Robert considered the question for several blocks before answering. Relieved, mostly. I think I've been trying to be someone I'm not for so long that I'd forgotten who I really am. Losing the house, losing Valerie, having to start over. It's scary, but it's also kind of freeing. We drove in comfortable silence for several minutes. Mom, he said as we neared the airport, I want you to know that I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about the things you said about enabling and consequences and all that. And? I think you were right. I think I've been using you as a safety net for so long that I never learned how to actually stand on my own feet. Robert, let me finish, please. I've been going to counseling. There's a free clinic at the community center, and the counselor helped me see some patterns in my behavior that I didn't want to admit to. I felt a surge of hope mixed with pride.
What kind of patterns? The pattern of always looking for someone else to solve my problems. First you, then Valerie, then you again. The pattern of making choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could actually manage. The pattern of taking your love and support for granted because I knew it would always be there. We had reached the airport and Robert pulled into a parking space. He turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. I want you to go to Seattle, Mom. I want you to see Michael, to have adventures, to remember who you were before you became my mother. I'll always be your mother, Robert. I know, but you're also Shirley. You're also a woman who has her own dreams and needs and desires, and it took me 35 years to figure that out. We sat in the car for another few minutes, neither of us wanting to break the spell of this new understanding between us. Will you call me when you get there? He asked. Of course. Will you be okay? I'll be fine. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in my adult life, I'm going to try to solve my own problems and make my own choices. It's terrifying, but it's also exciting. At the security checkpoint, Robert hugged me with an intensity I hadn't felt from him since he was a child. I love you, Mom, he whispered in my ear. Have the time of your life. I love you too, son, and I'm proud of the man you're becoming. As the plane lifted off, I pressed my face to the window and watched my city grow smaller below me. Somewhere down there was the house where I had raised my son, where I had cared for my husband through his final illness, where I had lived a life of service and sacrifice and quiet contentment. But ahead of me was Seattle and Michael and possibilities I couldn't even imagine. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. I spent the time thinking about the girl I had been at 22, full of dreams and ambitions. I thought about the woman I had become. Devoted wife and mother, skilled seamstress, quiet caretaker. And I thought about the woman I might still become if I was brave enough to find out. When I saw Michael waiting for me at the baggage claim, I felt my heart skip a beat. He had aged, of course. His hair was completely white, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 40 years ago. But his smile was the same, and the way his face lit up when he saw me was the same. And when he hugged me, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. The feeling of being cherished, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. Shirley, he said, holding me at arm's length so he could look at me. You're even more beautiful than I remembered. I don't have to say that, I replied, suddenly self-conscious. I'm not saying it to be polite, he said seriously. I'm saying it because it's true. You have a light in your eyes that wasn't there in the pictures I found of you online. You look free. Free. It was exactly how I felt. The drive to Michael's house took us through neighborhoods I had only seen in movies. Tree-lined streets with craftsman houses, coffee shops and bookstores on every corner, parks where people walked dogs and pushed children on swings. It looked like a place where people lived full lives, where they pursued their interests and built communities and created meaning beyond just survival. It's beautiful, I told him. Wait until you see the view from my deck, he replied. I want to cook dinner for you tonight while we watch the sunset over Puget Sound. His house was everything he had described and more. It was comfortable without being ostentatious, filled with books and art and photographs of his children and grandchildren.
The deck overlooked the water, where ferries moved like stately white birds between the islands. "This is your life," I said, more to myself than to him. "This could be our life," he replied quietly. Over the next few days, Michael showed me his Seattle. We walked through Pike Place Market, where vendors called out their wares and flowers bloomed in every color imaginable. We rode the ferry to Bainbridge Island and back, just for the pleasure of being on the water. We visited museums and gardens and neighborhoods, each more charming than the last. But more than showing me places, Michael showed me a way of being in the world that I had almost forgotten was possible. He listened when I talked, really listened, as if my thoughts and opinions were valuable. He asked about my dreams, not just the ones I had abandoned, but the ones I still harbored. He made me feel interesting, intelligent, worthy of attention and care. "Tell me about your sewing," he said one evening as we sat on his deck watching the lights of the city twinkle to life below us. So I told him about the wedding dresses I had created, about the satisfaction of taking someone's vision and making it real in silk and lace and careful stitches. I told him about the women who had trusted me with their most important garments, about the stories they had shared while I pinned and measured and adjusted. "You're an artist," he said when I finished. "I'm a seamstress," I corrected. "You're both. Don't diminish what you've created, Shirley. Don't minimize the skill and creativity and care that went into your work." It was the first time in years that anyone had talked about my work as if it mattered, as if it were something to be proud of, rather than just a way to earn money. I stopped taking on new clients a few years ago. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and my hands get stiff. "What do you miss about it?" The question surprised me. I had assumed that part of my life was over, that aging meant giving up the things that had given me joy and purpose. "I miss the creativity," I said slowly. "I miss the problem solving, figuring out how to make something work, how to make it beautiful. I miss the connection with the women I sewed for. What if you could do it again, not as a business, but for the joy of it?" "I don't know who would want—" "I'm not talking about customers," Michael interrupted. "I'm talking about you. What if you could create things just because you wanted to create them? What if you could sew just for the pleasure of working with beautiful fabrics and seeing your visions come to life?" The idea was revolutionary. I had spent so many years thinking about work in terms of necessity, of providing for others, that I had forgotten it could be about joy, about personal fulfillment. "I used to dream about writing a book," I said suddenly, "about the stories behind the clothes I made, the weddings, the celebrations, the moments in women's lives when they wanted to feel beautiful." "Why don't you?" "I don't know how. I never went to college. I'm not a writer." "You just told me a dozen stories that brought tears to my eyes," Michael said. "You are a writer, Shirley. You just haven't written anything down yet." That night, I lay in Michael's guest room and thought about possibilities I hadn't considered in decades. What if I could write that book? What if I could return to sewing not out of necessity, but out of love for the craft? What if I could live a life guided by passion rather than duty? The next morning, Michael's daughter Carmen came to have breakfast with us. She was a woman in her 40s, a successful attorney with kind eyes and her father's warm smile. "I have to tell you," she said to me over coffee, "I haven't seen my dad this happy since before Mom got sick. Thank you for bringing back his joy." "He's brought back mine too," I replied, and realized it was true. "Dad tells me you're a seamstress, that you've created beautiful things for 40 years. "I was a seamstress. I don't work anymore." "But you still have the skills, the knowledge, the creativity." I nodded. "We have a community theater group here that's always looking for volunteers to help with costumes. They do everything from Shakespeare to contemporary plays. Would you be interested?" The idea excited me more than I expected. "I don't know if I'd be good enough." "Mom," Michael said gently, "stop diminishing yourself. You spent decades creating works of art that made women feel beautiful on the most important days of their lives. Of course you're good enough." After Carmen left, Michael and I walked along the waterfront. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of seagulls and fairy horns and the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. "Shirley," Michael said as we sat on a bench overlooking the water, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What is it? Would you consider staying, not just for the rest of your visit, but permanently? Would you consider making a life here with me?"
My house, my few remaining friends, the life I had built in my hometown. But as I sat there, looking out at the water, breathing in the salt air, feeling more alive than I had in years, those reasons seemed less like obstacles and more like excuses. "What would that look like?" I asked. "However you want it to look. We could get married, or we could just be companions. You could live here with me, or you could get your own place nearby. We could travel together, explore new places, create new memories. You could write your book, volunteer with the theater group, rediscover parts of yourself that have been dormant for too long. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll have had a beautiful adventure. But surely, what if it does work out? What if we could have 5 or 10 or 15 years of real happiness together? Aren't you curious about that possibility?" That evening, I called Robert. "Mom, how's Seattle? How's Michael?" "Seattle is beautiful, and Michael is—" I paused, searching for the right words. "Michael makes me feel like myself again." "That's wonderful. I can hear it in your voice. You sound different, happier." "Robert, I need to tell you something. Michael has asked me to consider staying here permanently." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "And," he said finally, "and I'm thinking about it." Another pause. "How do you feel about that?" he asked, and I was touched that he was asking about my feelings rather than immediately focusing on how my decision would affect him. "Terrified," I admitted, "and excited, and guilty." "Guilty about what?" "About leaving you, about starting over at 70, about choosing my own happiness for once." "Mom," Robert said, and his voice was firm, "you should choose your own happiness. You've spent your entire adult life putting other people first. If Michael makes you happy, if Seattle makes you happy, then that's where you should be." "But what about me? Mom, I'm 35 years old. It's time I learned to live my own life instead of expecting you to revolve around mine. Actually, it's past time." "Are you sure?" "I'm positive. Besides, I have news of my own. I got promoted at the cleaning company. I'm going to be a supervisor with better hours and better pay. And I've been accepted into a community college program to get my accounting certification." The pride in his voice made my heart swell. "Robert, that's wonderful." "Thanks. And, Mom, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For taking so long to grow up. For treating you like a safety net instead of a person, for never asking what you wanted or needed, for letting Valerie treat you the way she did." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. "I love you, son." "I love you too, Mom. And I want you to be happy. Truly, completely happy."
If that means staying in Seattle, then stay in Seattle. The next morning, I found Michael in his kitchen making coffee and reading the newspaper, a scene of domestic contentment that spoke to something deep inside me. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, looking up with a smile that still made my heart skip a beat. "Good morning." He poured me a cup of coffee, and we sat together at his kitchen table, looking out at the garden where roses bloomed in shades of pink and yellow and deep red. "I talked to Robert last night." "And?" "And he thinks I should stay if it would make me happy." "And would it make you happy?" I looked at this man who had found me after 40 years, who valued my thoughts and dreams, who made me feel like a woman worth cherishing. I looked around his kitchen, imagining myself making breakfast here, working on my book at the little desk by the window, planning costumes for the community theater. Yes, I said. I think it would make me very happy. Michael's face broke into the biggest smile I had ever seen. Then stay, he said simply. 3 months later, I was back in my hometown, packing up the house I had lived in for 25 years. Robert helped me sort through decades of accumulation, deciding what to take to Seattle, what to donate, what to keep for him. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked as we packed boxes of books and photographs. "More sure than I've been about anything in years," I replied. "I'm going to miss you." "I'm going to miss you too. But Robert, we'll talk on the phone every week. You can visit me in Seattle. I can come back here sometimes to see you. This isn't goodbye forever. It's just the next chapter." As I wrapped my mother's china, the same china I had set the table with the night this all began, I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. Robert was building his own life, taking responsibility for his choices, becoming the man I had always hoped he could be. I was about to start a new life with a man who loved me, in a city that felt like possibility itself. The night before I left for Seattle permanently, Robert took me out to dinner at a small restaurant where we could talk quietly. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. "What is it?" "A letter. Don't read it now. Wait until you're settled in Seattle." "Robert." "Please, Mom, it's something I need to say to you, but it's easier for me to write than to speak." I tucked the envelope into my purse next to the plane ticket that represented my new beginning. "I'm proud of you, you know," I told him. "For what?" "For becoming independent, for taking charge of your life, for supporting my decision even though it means being farther apart." "I'm proud of you too," he replied, "for having the courage to start over, for choosing happiness, for showing me that it's never too late to change." The flight to Seattle felt different this time. Instead of the nervous excitement of a visitor, I felt the calm satisfaction of someone coming home. Michael was waiting for me at baggage claim with flowers, not roses this time, but daisies, cheerful and bright like my mood. "Welcome home," he said as he hugged me. Home. The word felt right. That evening, we sat on his deck, our deck now, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I opened Robert's letter with trembling hands. "Dear Mom," it began. "I've been thinking about the night this all started, when Valerie and I came to you asking for money. I've been thinking about how entitled we were, how disrespectful, how blind to everything you had already sacrificed for me. I want you to know that losing the house, losing Valerie, having to start over from nothing, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because it was easy, but because it forced me to finally grow up. It forced me to see you clearly for the first time in my adult life. You're not just my mother, and you never were. You're Shirley, a talented, intelligent, creative woman who gave up her dreams to raise me. You're a woman who deserves love and respect and happiness, not just in service to others, but for your own sake. I hope Michael knows how lucky he is. I hope Seattle appreciates the gift they're receiving. I hope you write your book and sew beautiful things and have adventures I can't even imagine. Most of all, I hope you're happy. Not the kind of happiness that comes from making other people happy, but the deep, genuine happiness that comes from living the life you want to live. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. Thank you for being brave enough to choose yourself. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start over. Fly high, Mom. You deserve it. With all my love and gratitude, Robert. P.S. Michael called me last week to ask for my blessing before he proposed. I told him he has it, and more than that, he has my gratitude for making my mother smile, the way she used to when I was little. I looked up from the letter to find Michael watching me with gentle eyes. He told you he was going to propose? He told me he was thinking about it. He wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable with the idea. And what did you tell him? Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I told him I'd been thinking about it since the day you decided to stay. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. Not flashy or expensive, but beautiful in its understated grace. "Shirley," he said, taking my hand, "we've already wasted 40 years. I don't want to waste any more time. Will you marry me?" I looked at this man who had found me just when I thought my life was over, who had shown me that second chances were possible at any age, who loved me not for what I could provide, but for who I was. "Yes," I said through happy tears.
"Yes, I will marry you." 6 months later, we were married on a beach outside Seattle, with Robert and Michael's 3 children as witnesses. It was a small ceremony, intimate and joyful, with the sound of waves providing our wedding music and the setting sun painting everything in golden light. Robert cried during the entire ceremony, but they were tears of joy. Afterward, he pulled me aside. "I never thought I'd see my mother get married for love," he said. "I always assumed your marriage to Dad had been practical, based on security and shared responsibility. But seeing you today, seeing how you look at Michael and how he looks at you, I realize I never really understood what love could look like." "Your father and I did love each other," I assured him. "But it was a different kind of love. Quieter, more practical. This feels like what you were meant to have all along? Like what I was brave enough to choose this time." As Michael and I settled into married life, I discovered that happiness at 70 looked different than I had imagined. It was quieter than the passionate intensity of youth, but deeper. It was built on appreciation rather than expectation, on gratitude rather than entitlement. I started volunteering with the community theater and discovered that my years of experience had given me skills the younger volunteers didn't have. I could solve problems they couldn't see, create solutions from seemingly impossible constraints. The artistic director, a dynamic woman named Sarah, became a close friend. "You're wasted on alterations," she told me after I had figured out how to transform a 1950s evening gown into a Shakespearean costume. "You should be our head costume designer." "I don't have any formal training," I protested. "You have 40 years of experience and an eye for what works. That's worth more than any degree." So I became the head costume designer for the Seattle Community Theater, a role that challenged me in ways I hadn't been challenged in decades. Each production required research, creativity, problem-solving, and collaboration. I found myself learning about historical periods, studying paintings to understand how fabric would have moved and draped, working with directors to understand character motivation through costume choices. "You're thriving," Michael observed one evening as I spread fabric samples across our dining room table, planning costumes for our upcoming production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. "I feel like I'm using parts of my brain that have been asleep for years," I admitted. I had forgotten how good it feels to be challenged, to learn new things, to create something that didn't exist before. "Tell me about the book," he said, settling into the chair across from me. The book. I had been working on it slowly, writing down the stories behind the clothes that I had made over the years. At first, I had been intimidated by the blank page, convinced that I had nothing important to say. But as I began to write, the stories flowed out of me like water that had been dammed up for too long. There was Margaret, who had come to me for her wedding dress 3 weeks before her wedding, in tears because the dress she had ordered online didn't fit. I had worked 18-hour days to create something that would make her feel beautiful on her special day. There was Rosa, whose quinceañera dress needed to represent both her Mexican heritage and her American dreams, a challenge that had pushed me to incorporate traditional embroidery techniques I had to learn from YouTube videos. There was Helen, an elderly woman who had come to me wanting a dress for her grandson's wedding, something that would make her feel elegant despite the wheelchair she had been confined to after a stroke.
Each story revealed something about the woman who had worn the clothes, but also about me, about the seamstress who had listened to their dreams and fears, who had translated their visions into fabric and thread, who had been trusted with their most important moments. I never realized, I told Michael, that I was documenting 40 years of women's lives. Every dress tells a story not just about fashion, but about hopes and dreams and celebrations and transformations. When do I get to read it? When it's finished, and when I'm brave enough to let someone else see it. Surely, you were brave enough to move across the country to marry a man you hadn't seen in 40 years. I think you can handle sharing your writing. As our first year of marriage passed, I began to understand what I had been missing in my previous life. It wasn't just romantic love, though that was part of it. It was the feeling of being seen as a complete person, of having my thoughts and opinions valued, of being encouraged to pursue my interests and passions. Michael and I developed routines that felt both comfortable and exciting. We took long walks through different Seattle neighborhoods, each one revealing new coffee shops or bookstores or parks to explore. We cooked elaborate dinners together, experimenting with recipes from the cuisines of countries we wanted to visit. We read books together, sometimes the same book so we could discuss it, sometimes different books so we could share what we were learning. I feel like I'm in college again, I told him one evening as we debated the merits of a novel we had both just finished. Better than college, he replied. We have the wisdom of experience to bring to everything we're learning. The most surprising part of my new life was how naturally I fit into Michael's social circle. His friends, retired engineers and teachers and business people, welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't expected. I found myself having dinner parties, joining book clubs, participating in community activities in ways I never had in my hometown.
You know what I think? Said Janet, one of the women in my book club, after a particularly lively discussion about the protagonist's choices in the novel we were reading. I think you were always this person, this engaged, thoughtful, articulate person. You just never had the right environment to let her flourish. Her words stayed with me for days. Had I always been this person? Or had I become her through the experience of being valued, encouraged, challenged in ways I never had been before? Robert visited for Thanksgiving, and I could see the changes in him as clearly as he could see the changes in me. He looked healthier, more confident, more settled in his own skin. His accounting certification had led to a better job, and he had moved into a small apartment that he was furnishing slowly and carefully with pieces he actually liked, rather than things he thought he should have. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me as we walked along the waterfront after Thanksgiving dinner, about enabling and consequences and all that. And I realized that in some ways I was as trapped in our old pattern as you were. I didn't know how to be your son without being your responsibility. I didn't know how to have a relationship with you that wasn't based on you taking care of me. We stopped at a bench overlooking the water, where ferries moved like stately white birds between the islands. How does it feel now? I asked. Scary sometimes, lonely sometimes, but also freeing. When I solve a problem at work, or figure out how to fix something in my apartment, or handle a difficult situation, I feel proud in a way I never did when someone else was always there to rescue me. I'm proud of you too. Thanks, Mom. And I'm proud of you. Look at this life you've built. Look how happy you are. As if summoned by his words, Michael appeared with hot chocolate from a nearby cafe. How are my favorite people doing? He asked, settling onto the bench beside me. We're doing great, Robert replied, and I could hear genuine affection in his voice when he spoke to Michael. Actually, I wanted to thank you for something. What's that? For loving my mother the way she deserves to be loved. For seeing her as a complete person, not just as someone's mother or someone's helper. For giving her the chance to be herself. Michael reached over and took my hand. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. I'm the lucky one. You're both lucky, Robert said with a grin. And so am I, for getting to see what love actually looks like when two people choose each other as equals. That evening, after Robert had gone back to his hotel, I sat at my desk working on my book.
The story I was writing was about Mrs. Chen, who had come to me for help with her daughter's wedding dress. The dress had been her grandmother's, brought from China decades ago, but it was too small and too delicate to be worn as it was.
Chen had wanted to incorporate the beautiful silk and intricate beadwork into a new dress that would honor both her family's history and her daughter's modern style. As I wrote about the hours we had spent together, carefully removing beads and preserving every piece of the original fabric, I realized I was writing about more than just a dress. I was writing about the ways women support each other, about the passing down of traditions, about the courage it takes to honor the past while embracing the future. "How's it coming?" Michael asked, bringing me a cup of tea. "It's strange," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I thought I was just writing about sewing, but I'm actually writing about life, about the ways we transform ourselves, about the courage it takes to change, about the beauty of small acts of creation and care." Sounds like a book worth reading. I hope so. I'm starting to think it might actually be something special. I know it will be. You're something special. 2 years after our wedding, my book was finished. It was called Threads of Story, A Seamstress's Tales, and it contained 40 stories about the women whose clothes I had made, their dreams and celebrations and transformations. But woven throughout was my own story, the story of a woman who had defined herself through service to others until she finally learned to value herself. Michael helped me find a small publisher in Seattle who specialized in memoirs and personal narratives. To my amazement, they wanted to publish it. "It's beautifully written," the editor told me during our first meeting. "But more than that, it's a story that will resonate with so many women who have lost themselves in caring for others. It's about reclaiming identity, about the courage to start over, about finding love and purpose at any age." The book launch was held at a small bookstore in Seattle, and I was nervous beyond words. What if no one came? What if people didn't understand what I was trying to say? What if I had been wrong to think my stories were worth telling? But the bookstore was packed. My theater friends came, my book club came, Michael's children came. To my complete surprise, Robert flew out from across the country with a woman he had been dating, a teacher named Linda who seemed genuinely like him for who he was, rather than what he could provide. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he told me before the reading. "My mother, the published author. I couldn't be more proud." Even more surprising, several of the women whose stories I had written about had somehow found out about the book and made the journey to be there. Margaret, whose wedding dress had been my emergency creation, hugged me tightly. "You saved my wedding day," she said. "But reading about it in your book, I realized you did more than that. You listened to me, you cared about my dreams, you made me feel beautiful and important."
That meant everything. As I read excerpts from my book to the crowded bookstore, I felt a sense of completion I had never experienced before. These stories, these women's lives, my own journey, it all mattered. It was all worth preserving, worth sharing, worth celebrating. "This book," I said during the question and answer session afterward, "is about the invisible work that women do. Not just sewing, but listening, caring, creating beauty in small ways. It's about the importance of seeing each other clearly, of valuing each other's dreams and stories. And it's about the courage to change your life, even when you think it might be too late." An elderly woman in the back row raised her hand. "How did you find the courage to leave everything familiar and start over at 70? I thought about her question carefully before answering. I think the courage came from finally understanding that I deserved happiness just as much as anyone else. For so many years, I had put everyone else's needs first, and I told myself that was noble, that it was what good mothers and wives were supposed to do. But I finally realized that constantly sacrificing yourself doesn't actually help anyone. It just creates patterns of dependency and resentment that hurt everyone involved. So what changed? I met someone who saw me as a complete person, not just as someone's mother or someone's caretaker. And I started asking myself what I wanted, what would make me happy, what kind of life I wanted to live. Those were questions I hadn't asked myself in decades. After the event, as we cleaned up and said goodbye to friends, Michael put his arm around me. "How does it feel to be a published author?"
Surreal. Wonderful. Like I finally become who I was always meant to be. And who was that? I thought about the question as we walked to the car under a sky full of stars. Someone who creates things, someone who tells stories, someone who values her own experiences and dreams as much as she values everyone else's. I love that woman, Michael said, kissing my forehead. So do I replied, and meant it completely. 3 years into our marriage, we took our first major trip together to Europe to see the places we had both dreamed of visiting when we were young. In Paris, we walked along the Seine and ate croissants in sidewalk cafes. In Rome, we marveled at ancient architecture and ate gelato in the shadow of the Colosseum. In London, we saw plays in the West End and explored museums filled with treasures from around the world. But the most meaningful part of the trip was how we experienced it together. Michael was an ideal travel companion. Curious, flexible, patient when I wanted to spend hours in fabric shops looking at textiles I had only read about. I discovered that I was braver than I had ever imagined, willing to try new foods, navigate foreign languages, adapt to unexpected changes in our itinerary.
Look at you, Michael said one evening as we sat in a small restaurant in a Tuscan hill town, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the ancient buildings gold. You're glowing. I feel like I'm seeing the world through new eyes, I admitted. Everything seems more vivid, more beautiful, more possible. That's what happens when you stop living other people's lives and start living your own. On the flight home, I started a new writing project. Not another book, but a series of articles about travel as an older adult, about the particular joys and challenges of discovering the world after 70. A travel magazine in Seattle agreed to publish them, and suddenly I had a new career as a travel writer. I can't believe this is my life, I told Robert during one of our weekly phone calls. At 73, I'm traveling the world and writing about it for magazines. A year ago, I thought my life was essentially over. Your life wasn't over, Robert said. You just needed the right environment for it to bloom. Robert's own life had continued to flourish. He had been promoted again at work and had moved in with Linda, a relationship that seemed built on mutual respect and genuine affection. He was taking art classes at the community college, something he had always wanted to do but had never made time for when his life was consumed with financial crises and drama. Linda thinks I have real talent, he told me shyly. She wants to help me apply for a bachelor's degree program in graphic design. That's wonderful, Robert. Do you want to do that? I think I do. For the first time in my life, I'm making choices based on what I actually want, rather than what I think I should do or what someone else expects of me. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Mom. And thank you for showing me that it's possible to change your life completely. If you can do it at 70, I can certainly do it at 38. As my 4th year in Seattle began, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible dinner when Robert and Valerie had asked for money. That woman, the one who had defined herself entirely through service to others, who had never considered her own happiness, who had been so trapped in patterns of enablement that she couldn't see clearly, felt like someone I had known in another lifetime. This woman, the one writing travel articles and designing theater costumes and hosting dinner parties, felt like who I had always been meant to be. Not better than the other woman, not superior to her, but more complete, more fully realized, more authentically herself. Do you ever regret it? Michael asked one evening as we sat on our deck watching the sunset, leaving your old life behind. Never, I said without hesitation. The only thing I regret is waiting so long to do it. What took you so long? I thought about his question carefully. Fear, partly. Fear of being selfish, fear of disappointing people, fear of making a mistake.
But also, I think I didn't know I had a choice.
I had been defined by my roles for so long, wife, mother, caretaker, that I forgot I was a person underneath all of that. And what made you remember? You did. The night you called, when you asked if I was happy, it was the first time in years that anyone had asked me about my own feelings, my own desires. It woke something up in me that had been sleeping for decades. I'm glad I called. So am I, every single day. As I write this story now, 5 years after that life-changing dinner, I'm sitting on my deck in Seattle, looking out at Puget Sound, waiting for Michael to come home from the market where he's buying ingredients for the dinner we'll cook together tonight. Robert is visiting next month with Linda, who is now his fiancée, a woman who challenges him to be his best self rather than enabling his worst impulses. My book has found readers far beyond what I ever expected, and I receive letters from women all over the country who tell me that my story gave them courage to make changes in their own lives. Some have left unhappy marriages, others have pursued dreams they had abandoned. Still others have simply learned to value themselves enough to ask for respect from the people in their lives. The community theater just announced next season's lineup, and I'm already sketching costume ideas for our production of Our Town, thinking about how to use fabric and color and texture to help tell the story of lives well-loomed and love discovered. Tomorrow, I start research for my next book, not about sewing this time, but about the courage to reinvent yourself at any age, about the beauty of second chances, about the revolutionary act of putting yourself first after decades of putting everyone else first. When people ask me what the most important thing I've learned is, I always give them the same answer. It's never too late to remember who you are beneath all the roles you've played for others. It's never too late to ask what you want, what makes you happy, what kind of life you want to live. It's never too late to choose yourself. The woman I was 5 years ago, the one who lived small and quiet and safe, who measured her worth by how much she sacrificed for others, wasn't wrong to live that way. She did what she thought was right with the understanding she had at the time. But she also wasn't the complete story of who I could be. This woman, the one who travels and writes and creates and loves boldly, isn't better than the other one. She's just more fully realized, more authentically herself, more courageous about claiming the life she wants. And if there's one thing I want every woman reading this to understand, it's this. You deserve happiness. You deserve respect. You deserve love that sees you as a complete person, not just as what you can provide for others. You deserve to have dreams and pursue them. You deserve to put yourself first sometimes, without feeling guilty about it.
It doesn't matter if you're 30 or 50 or 70 or 90. It doesn't matter if everyone around you has gotten used to you being a certain way. It doesn't matter if people call you selfish for finally valuing yourself. The courage to change your life is always available to you. The permission to want more, to be more, to live more fully, you don't need anyone else to give that to you. You can give it to yourself. And if you're wondering whether it's worth it, whether the risk and uncertainty and possible disappointment are worth taking the chance on happiness, I can tell you from experience, they absolutely are. Because the alternative, living a small, safe life that doesn't really belong to you, isn't actually safer. It's just a different kind of risk. The risk of reaching the end of your life and realizing you never really lived it. So be brave. Ask yourself what you want. Listen to the answer. And then do something about it. Your future self is waiting for you to find the courage to meet her. And I promise you, she is more wonderful than you can possibly imagine.